Welcome back, everyone, to our webinar series, Embracing Change. So today we have our well-being head, Almu, who's down under in Australia at the moment, spending her time between Spain and Australia. So welcome, Almu. Thank you for taking the time today with us to talk about stages in human development and what that means. So maybe a little background, if you don't mind, a few minutes to share a little bit about your background so people have an idea of how you came to where you are today, and then can get into the fun stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Faisal. Thank you for having me here. About my background, I guess what the part that is relevant is I've been working as a coach for the last 15 years. The last 15 years. And mostly in developmental coaching. So I've had this developmental approach to coaching from the very beginning. Actually, not the very beginning. When I started, it was just a more getting things done kind of coaching. And I felt like something was missing. So I went on a roller coaster trying to find until I got to this developmental aspect, which I guess is what we're going to be talking about today.
But before that, you were an entrepreneur and a biotech lady.
Yes, I tend to forget about those things. Yes, I started as a molecular biologist and then did other things. And eventually I founded a biotech company in Spain doing cell biology treatments for Parkinson's disease. And then I worked for the Spanish government and the European Commission in health research for development and on health research policy making, and then specifically on health research for development. And then I just started working as a coach full time after that. So yeah.
Pretty heavy background, not a detail to be forgotten, right? There's a base upon which you built that, and the inquiry and the curiosity came from really something was missing, right? So let's unpack that. So when you say you went from that straightforward coaching to saying, something is missing, right? So why human development? Why is it relevant? And why does it matter?
So I guess what I realized was that there were ways of coaching or coaching methodologies that worked for some people and not for others. And it wasn't very clear why it was. So I guess that's how I started working on it. Like there were clients that would respond to the way I was trained to be a coach and clients that didn't. And I wanted to know why is this not working? So looking into developmental psychology is essentially realize that we mature, we develop from birth until pretty much until we die. But we didn't used to think that. More than a little over a decade ago, we didn't think that there was more growing up beyond when we reached adulthood and our own sense of who we were. And now we know over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a lot of research on it, and we can see that our mind, the way our mind works and the way we interpret the world changes following a trajectory. And that's what developmental psychology is about. How is it that it changes? And what I realized was that the coaching that I was taught, the methodologies that I was initially taught, were for a particular stage of development, but didn't always work otherwise for other stages of development.
Okay, so when it comes to, we're taking care of families, we're taking care of individuals, right, who are obviously journeying life and are looking for support. And at the same time, people communicating with each other, right? So why does it matter what stage I'm in when I'm communicating? So maybe let's do like this. Let's understand what are the different stages. Let's go to the basics. And then we can go in to say, if I'm at a stage and you're at a different stage, why does it matter for us to be able to communicate and relate and understand each other and to be able to look at things from your experience or your perspective? Like, how does that play out? So maybe we go back to the basics and say, okay, what are the different stages? And, from birth until you said, till it's time to transform.
So the developmental map that we're using at Geneticare and that I use mostly in my coaching is based on Stages International's research. And it looks, because you can actually look at development and you can divide it in different ways to use different maps so that you can make sense of it, let's say. So the way that stages make sense of it is looking at different perspectives. So so when born, we can only see one perspective. Like I can see what I see, but I don't know what it is that you see. And I don't even know, when this is when I'm a toddler and a baby, I don't even know that you're seeing me. So that would be like the first person perspective. Second person perspective is when I realize that you actually see me. And I can also see that if you go behind a door or behind the wall, you're still there. I cannot see you, but you're still there. That's the second person perspective. And it goes on beyond that. But essentially what we're looking at is the content of our awareness. What is it that is the content of our awareness that is in the foreground that I am able to compute, essentially? What is the data that becomes part, that is computed with my operating system? And depending on the data, I need a different operating system and different software. So that's essentially the basics of it. So when we look at the content of our awareness, the basic way of kind of dividing it is we see concrete objects, we see subtle objects, or in the latest stages, we see meta-aware objects. So the concrete objects are, it's exactly that, something that you can put a fence around, something that you can touch, you can see, you can feel. And subtle objects are more like thoughts and ideas and abstract symbols that may refer to a concrete object, but they are the abstract symbols and the ways that they are related. So I can put up a map if that would be helpful, the roadmap of stages. Can I share the screen?
Yes, of course.
Let me see if I can do that. Here you go. Here it is. And where is mine? Just 1 second. I can't make it big. Here.
Yeah.
There it is. Need permissions or something. There you go.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, so this is the roadmap. So on the left is the 1.0 and 1.5, which is the first person perspective. And then we move at the bottom of the image. And then we move to 2.0, 2.5. And when we move to 3.0, that's a big jump that we move into subtle objects. 3.0, 3.5, 4.0, 4.5. And the move to 5.0, it's the move from seeing or experiencing subtle objects to experiencing concrete, subtle, and meta-aware objects. So the beauty of the stages map is that it's very simple in essence. So it has identified 3 questions that can help us define what perspective we're looking at. And those 3 questions are iterative, so they repeat in the concrete and the subtle and the meta-aware tier, so that we can kind of foresee what the next stage that we're not experiencing may look like based on those questions. Is this okay? Should I continue with this?
Yeah, let's go
sense?
through this. Yeah, let's go through this so that people can have a visual, and then we'll ask some questions to understand deeper. But I think let's go very basic and really go through it, because some of the words, they might not be able to, they're probably wondering. So
the way I like to look at this is that, so we're looking at the content of our awareness and how the different things come to our foreground in our awareness, right? So in the early stages, and this is the concrete tier, is until we are teenagers or late teens, we see concrete objects. And we can look at them from an individual perspective or a collective perspective. So that would be the second question. The first question is, are the objects concrete, subtle, or meta-aware? The second question is, the social preference is in the foreground, are they individual or the collective? And the third question is the really beautiful one, because it's about the skills that we have that come online with each one of the stages. So the more aware we are, the more it means the more capacity we have to see and compute data. And then we have competencies, which is different competencies that arise with those stages, with that capacity. And then on top of that, we can develop some certain skills that will that are foundational for the skills that we can use in our profession, in our daily life, or whatever. So I like to look at this as horizontal skills.
Okay.
So, so the horizontal skills that come up and repeat in the concrete, subtle, and meta-aware tiers are receptive, active, reciprocal, and interpenetrative. So we start when we learn something. This is based on the learning cycle. So when we learn something, we start by receiving the information, and we're just receiving it and are not quite able to make sense of it yet. And the next step that we go through is we become active with it. We start manipulating the information so that in manipulating it, we are able to make more sense with it or of it. In the reciprocal stage, we're able to be active and receptive. And when we are in a relationship, for example, that's being giving and receiving and doing both, and we're looking for harmony in that and balance in the giving and receiving. And the interpenetrative stage is the stage where we are one with the other. So in terms of rules, for example, is like the rules are integrated and they become part of who I am. And that's something that happens at the 2.5 stage.
So that's normally by the late teen, or that's what age is that normally?
By the late teens, normally.
Late teens, okay.
There are people that don't grow beyond that stage. But in general, I'd say that the world has moved into the 3.0 and 3.5 stages. The meta-aware stages are very, very rare. And the 4.0 and 4.5 are starting to, they're more defined, but in terms of the general global population, it's still a very small amount.
Okay, so now I'm a late teenager. I'm able to embody. That's how I'm thinking about it. I'm able to embody the rules, embody that way of being, or whatever is my values, right? That are ingrained within my family or within society. Okay, and then what happens? What happens that I end up at 3.0 or 3.5? What's
so
next?
What happens when we move from one stage to another is essentially we reach the ceiling of our awareness. Okay. And then we start asking questions. So like the world as I knew it doesn't quite make sense to me anymore. And then I start looking, why is it not making sense? So that move from the 2.5 to 3.0 is a move where young adults start experimenting, right? And experiencing new things. And us as coaches, for example, that's when we ask people to go out and try different things that you haven't done before. Try to get exposed to many different things so that you can find out who you are, because that's what's happening. At 3.0, we're starting to see to be aware or to realize what our new subtle me is. Because the subtle me has not been available to me until now. It's only now that I can start to see myself in a different way. So that's what happens. So first I am receptive. I am getting all these different information from different activities, different things, different people, studying, learning. That's what we do at 3.0. And it's a beautiful stage, because it's a stage where we become experts. We realize this is what I like the most, this is what I am the best at. And then we just want to do the best, develop the best skills. We can be quite perfectionistic and not and not be really aware of time, for example. So be extremely, I confuse always efficient and effective, but I think, I don't know. So just really want to do everything really, really well and thoroughly, but maybe miss deadlines, for example. That's something that we do see at 3.0.
Okay, so at that stage, how open am I to other ideas? It's still very individualistic. So I'm still very, is it more, I'm still, what I've learned, that's kind of the way. But then what about my approach towards others? Do I listen to them and because they're expert at that? Or is it, how does that work?
Yes, we look for an expert to give us advice, or a mentor, somebody that has, done things that are recognized as somebody good in their field. So that's what we look for. We look for expert advice and tend to be less receptive to those who are not experts and are giving us advice.
Okay, so I'm an expert and that's what I do because I've spent my time, energy, and resource to become that. So I lean on other experts and their word kind of becomes the directive or the word of God or whatever you want to use. Okay.
Yeah.
Then what happens? Yeah. Then so I'm an expert now.
So here we're receptive, right? And then a competency that arises at this stage is metacognition. And this is really, really important. It's foundational, is the basis of all the subtle level, and it's the basis of development. I did not say that in the concrete we have sensing when we are very young, and then meta-sensing when we start being aware of what we're sensing, which comes up at 1.5. And then cognition starts coming up. And here in the subtle tier, what we see is that metacognition comes up, and this is the capacity to think about what I am thinking, to think about what I feel, to think about what I'm sensing, to think about what I do, and to think about the way I relate. So this is very, very important competency, is what the modern world is based upon, is what the scientific method is based upon. So at 3.0, we are able to create rules. So we see how things work in nature, for example, and then we create, oh, wow, this is how it is happening. So I can abstract that there is a law of nature. There's the law of gravity, for example. And then at 3.5, the difference is I start being active. This is the competency of being active. I start being active about what I think. In terms of the scientific method, for example, it's when I have a hypothesis and then I can experiment. I can start creating experiments so I can prove or disprove my hypothesis. So, and in our personal life, for example, we can see that we start to see very clearly that the way I think and the way I feel and the sensations that I feel in my body, the way I relate and the way I behave are all interconnected. They're all interconnected. If I think this way, then I feel this way. If I actually change the way I think, it actually changes everything. It changes the way I feel and the way I relate and the way I behave. So that's the later stage metacognition. When we get to that point, then we're able to realize, wow, I see that I think this way and I feel this way and then I behave this way in certain situations, but not in others. It's like there's a different part of me that feels this way, and they are real, true subpersonalities, and they start becoming in the foreground. And that's like the subtle, what we call the subtle collective in the stages framework. We start realizing that we have an internal collective that is talking to each other all the time. And then it starts making sense, like why, when I am with a particular person, they say something and it really triggers me. And then the same thing said by somebody else or in a different circumstance, it doesn't do it, right? So then you start seeing, wow, it's just different personalities. And you start seeing the internal collective as a system. So that's when systems thinking comes up. So we start to, yeah, to learn about systems within and to see the systems outside. And then we move to the 4.5 perspective, where then we have the ability to go deep inside, to zoom in, as we call it, and zoom out. So we can actually zoom into a very particular thing, even in my own interior, and zoom out and see the macro perspective of what's going on. And then you can say, oh, wow, from this perspective, I can see that if I change this tiny little thing here, then the whole thing is going to shift. So what we were able to do with our thoughts and feelings and sensations and behaviors at 3.5, now we can do with much larger systems at 4.5. So you can see that as we move up the scale, we have bigger capacity, more capacity, and then new competencies come up. And with the new competencies, new skills that allow us to work with a lot more data, more information, to connect many more dots. And therefore our life in the world is, or our decisions are based on a more informed database.
Okay, so that's kind of a multi-dimensional approach, but even 3.5 is still not single dimension, but like when you went from being the molecular biologist and then starting the biotech company, that was a 3.5 shift, correct? But then you went further to look at Parkinson's at a bigger level. Then you start to move, is that correct, to 4.5? Because now you're looking at a much more complex, much more diverse in how it impacts the world, or am I not getting that right?
That's a very, very interesting question. You can actually be at any level. You can have a coffee shop and have a 4.5 perspective and apply your 4.5 perspective on the coffee shop. So it is true that certain professions are more, that certain stages are more conducive to certain professions. But it's not necessarily the case. So you can actually be an expert and become an expert in complex adaptive systems, for example.
Okay.
So that would be, you know, using your expert capacity in a 4.5 systems capacity. So if I go back to myself, I think that yes, molecular biology was more like maybe a 3.0 way of looking at the world. And again, I kept seeing, like I can see in my own background, how I kept reaching the ceiling of my awareness, of my capacity. And I would go like, well, but what, I mean, first of all, if I spend my whole life looking at one single molecule, I'm just going to go crazy. That's one thing. And then the second is like, what about everything else? You know, this is connected to everything else. And, you know, just so you can actually go very, very, very deep and come, or very, very small, and come to the same conclusions as you do when you go very, very, very big. But when you find yourself in the middle, is like, I felt like I needed to explore more. And that was my way of looking at it. And then I wanted to work on something that was not just basic science, but that was applied, that could help humanity in some way. And that's how we went eventually into working on Parkinson's disease.
Okay, so that was the move from 3.0 to 3.5. And then what about after? So what happened after? So that way they can kind of help relate with the story.
Yeah, so looking at from my perspective, so going from, I guess I went from working as an entrepreneur in a biotech company, myself, working as for the European Commission and the Spanish government, and we worked really worldwide, and working on policy making that would be, my intention was that would be beneficial to humankind. So this is another aspect of the 4.0. The capacity is not only the kind of objects that are in our awareness, but also where we focus it. So for me, the world became a lot bigger. It was not just Parkinson's disease, which was for everyone, but it was still specific to Parkinson's disease. And then it became bigger. It was policymaking in health research, but also for like the world, all of humanity. How can we have one global health that would be beneficial for everyone? So the area of care and concern also grows up as we go up the stages. So that's one thing that happened to me. Another thing was more like in the interior aspect, like I would start really looking at myself really deeply. And I remember we had a group of mothers at this school where my children went, we were all very much into this. We were exploring these different therapies continuously. It was new things coming up all the time. And we would meet for breakfast after dropping off the children, and it was new things coming up. And so that's another thing that 4.0 does is community. It's a collective stage, and there's community. I learn from you and you learn from me. I learn from you and your experiences and how you have interpreted your own experiences, because we start realizing that we do, there's different interpretations, different contexts, different interpretations. So that was really beautiful. It was learning from the other mothers and learning from each other and doing therapy together and doing different experimenting. It was in a way what we do at 3.0, but this is the internal part when moving forward.
Collectively.
Working with the, and it was overflowing. It was like we couldn't wait to meet and talk about it and go through different experiences. So yeah, I guess that's how it worked out in my trajectory. And then at that point is when I came up, I started my coaching career, because it was so, I guess I just wanted to go deeper into it, and how can this help other people, and how can I work this way?
Okay, so that gives, and then the shift to 4.5, how did that transition? Is that when you started the coaching, or you were able to see things?
It started a little before the coaching. So that's another thing. Development is not homogeneous.
Okay.
I actually have a slide that I would like to show. Let me just show you.
Perfect.
A second. So what I did on this slide is I took the roadmap, the stages roadmap, and I rotated it 360 degrees, right? So we can say that we were born in the white circle in the middle, and then we grow up, and then all the stages are there. And if I look at that, then okay, I'm missing. So this is what I wanted to show. So development is not homogeneous. So we compare these are cuts of a tree trunk, right? So if we look at that, this slide, this would be perfect homogeneous development all the way to the top, like total expansion. We see all of it, right? And but it doesn't really happen that way. It tends to happen like this on the right here.
Yeah.
So we have some areas. These would be like the different areas of our lives, which is kind of what the stages assessment does. We haven't gone into that yet, but some are bigger than others. Some are more evolved or more developed than the others. And when we look at how it works in nature, I mean, sometimes they're just definitely not homogeneous, right? So here there's an area, and we can say what this area would be, the way we look at it in stages, but it's definitely not homogeneous. So I think that the way let me just go back here, the way I grew up, so before I started doing the coaching, I already started reading Ken Wilber, who was the philosopher that started me on the developmental path. And I realized that I would, that it totally made sense. It was like, whoa, development 4.5 is the first stage that actually gets development, that sees that, yes, we keep maturing all along, and that they're like building blocks, like one capacity and competency builds upon the previous one. And like that, it's like climbing up a mountain, get a greater and greater view. So I realized that by learning, just reading all by myself, this was just me studying and learning. I guess that was the researcher in me. And yeah, so my 4.5 was applied to coaching and human development and learning
So,
about how, yeah.
okay, that's beautiful. I just wanted to bring it to a real example, right? And so people can understand. So what happens to those few that you said that end up in the metaware? So, they like, how does that happen? And or why, or
So the difference between the subtle and the metaware is the objects that we're aware of. So in the subtle, we're aware of subtle objects, and it starts with being aware of our interiors. And then we start realizing that we are aware, that when we are aware, it's like things are in our awareness rather than just being out there. They really are in our awareness, and we are aware of thoughts. So then I'm not my thoughts, and I am not my body really, because I am aware of it. And then so the shift to the meta-aware is when we start realizing that I am aware of being aware. And then it's kind of a confusing stage, because I'm aware of being aware, but then but what am I? So then it takes all of the meta-aware to realize that I am the awareness that is aware of being aware, and it's aware of all the objects. But it takes all of the meta-aware to fully realize that.
so
That shift for me was realizing again the ceiling of my consciousness. Like I couldn't make sense of the world the way I had been looking at it. And then it was, I just kept inquiring and inquiring. Yep.
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for walking us through this roadmap. And now maybe we can remove the map. Yeah. And then so why would I want to do this as an individual or a family member? We're taking care of individuals within a family. Individuals come in individually as well as entrepreneurs. So why does it matter? And if you can walk through the assessment process that each person that is part of the genetic care pathway, first, why does it matter, and what does the process look like?
So it matters because it is helpful to have a map. Like when we're walking in a national park and we want to go from A to B, it's much easier to know what the map is and what to expect, and following the map, than just being open to whatever comes after the next step. Okay. So this is the equivalent of an internal map. How does the worldview change along the way? What is it that we learn? And it matters also because in our relationships, for example, people with different worldviews don't really understand each other unless they are aware that they are different worldviews. And we realize that they are all okay. They're just different ways of seeing the world, interpreting ourselves and others. So from the stage's perspective, we are only able to see what we're able to see. So when we connect to other people, we can see the perspectives that we have gone through ourselves, but we cannot see the perspectives that we haven't gone through. So that is helpful if we try to understand somebody that we are not able to understand. We just don't understand how they're making sense of the world. As leaders, if we know what competencies and capacities are available to the people that work with us, then we know what we can request from them. We can and what we cannot expect from them because it's not available to them yet.
You have to be mindful, right?
Is this helpful?
With the do no harm of Terry, right? The holding back the judgment, right?
Absolutely.
And the expectation based on those results, especially in relationship and especially at the workplace, could be a little bit a fine line, right? Because
I
you
mean,
know?
thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's really important. And the truth is that it's a range. You know, what we give people, we look at the assessment is 36 areas of life, 36 contexts, and then we score each one of them. And we score differently in each of them, because we may have developed some capacity or some competencies in some areas of life and not in others. So we, you know, just be compassionate with ourselves in those areas that we're not fully developed to our capacity, to a maximum capacity at this point, but also with others. We've all been there. And the fact that and all stages are absolutely beautiful. And some people may not evolve past 3.5 or 3.0, and it's absolutely beautiful. And they may be extremely happy and contributing a lot to society. So it doesn't really, there's no need to judge, as a matter of fact. There really is no need.
Yeah, but with the numbering, it kind of, you know, it's a bit, you know, that because it goes from 1 to 6 or whatever
Yes.
the 7 or whatever the number is, right? It kind of gives it a bit of a, you know, a numbering flavor, right? So that's the
Yeah.
only thing I think that would throw somebody off, including myself. You know, I've done this twice, and you know, and your ego gets triggered, you know, when
Yeah.
you know, and we've had people go through it and they're kind of like, oh, I was expecting differently. So there is a little bit, you know, we're human, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, it feels almost like a grading system from school, right? So, you know, I didn't get the highest mark. Well, nobody gets the highest mark, and that's the beauty of it. It keeps evolving. We keep evolving.
Yeah.
It's a moving target. We keep going, you know, keep evolving based on where we're at today. And also, so development, some people may just not want to develop it. That's the other thing, you know, may be really happy where they're at, and that's it.
Yeah, I remember sitting with Kim, and we were joking, and I said, just make sure that I never end up, you know, at least now in this life stage, in the meta stage, because I don't want to be in a stage of confusion for many years. That was the joke that Kim and I were chatting about, because, you know, I've heard the stories of those who are in that space and what they went through, and it was quite a ride, right? So it was just a joke, you know, with Kim, but it wasn't really a joke. It was actually, you know, a boundary, quote unquote, which may be limiting or maybe not. You know, it's
yeah, and I can totally see that. And at the same time, we know that the more people move to the higher stages, the more a community there is, and the more support there is. So while the first ones might have thought that they were going crazy, now we know that's why having a roadmap is really helpful, because then you know, oh wow, this is what's happening. And then you can start seeing, you know, Terry talks about confusions, you know, what is confusing you, and why are we having such a hard time? And to see that there are people at the other side of the tunnel that can hold our hands, or just let us know that we are okay, is extremely helpful.
okay.
Because,
so
you know, for the previous stages, we have our culture that supports us, right? Definitely 3.0, 3.5, the whole Western culture is based on that. So it's very supported. And now we, as Western culture, is trying to slowly move to the fourth person perspective, and, you know, also having a hard time there. It's just a matter of so finding a support, a community that supports you is really important in any shift.
So let's thank you for that. So let's go back now to the actual assessment. You said 36 stems, right? You didn't use with our stems, but I'm cheating a bit, right? So 36 stems of the different areas. So how does that work? Like what is it exactly that I need to do when I do this assessment?
So it's what we call a sentence completion test. So you get 36 sentence stems that you're supposed to complete. And then we score each individual stage, each individual sentence completion. And then we give you some recommendations and an assessment of what came out. Saying that it's a sentence completion can be a little misleading, because what we really need to know is what you really mean. So if you're, you have, and I don't want to disclose what the sentence stems are, but if you have a sentence stem and you just respond with 1 or 2 words, it's very hard for me as a scorer to actually see how your mind works. So I need to know how you come to that question. So you really just go for it. Just write it. Take this time. I would recommend that you take this time as a time to reflect on what those sentence stems are, which are important things in life. There are 36 different areas, and they are important. So sit down, reflect. What do I really think? And how do I communicate what I really think? Doesn't have to be a single sentence. It doesn't have to be a 100-word paragraph either, but somewhere where you feel that you have explained enough. And we usually say that 36 stems, you can do the completion in 1 hour in one sitting. I myself find that doing it in one sitting can be hard, and maybe 1 hour is short. So that's what I would recommend, that you take a little more time.
Yeah, because when I did, and I've done it twice, the idea was sentence completion means you complete the sentence. And I think what you're referring to is, what does this sentence stem, which is the beginning of a sentence, bring up for you? And I think it's the feeling and the thought, and then you want them to express what's coming up with some time and energy, and not just like me, finish the sentence, which could be anywhere from 2 words to 5, 6 words, right? Rather than, like you said, being in full expression. And both times, the first time I took an hour, the second time I took 40 minutes. So it's interesting to see. And this was the debate, right? When I did this and somebody else reviewed it, and they said, well, you wrote the test was 1, and when you're writing the book and you're writing your weekly emails, it's completely different. So what's going on here? I said, well, the second one, I'm doing it, I'm thinking about it, I'm sleeping on it, and then I'm re-looking at it and then submitting it. Because I believe that, for me, the night, right, is where all the processing happens subconsciously, and then the reaffirmation in the morning. So I think that's the funny thing, right? That so I'm glad that you're clarifying that, because I did not know that when I did this.
Yeah, so I think it's good that you have time to process it, and also it's important that there's not too much thinking. So we should not think so that I can get the highest score, because that's not really the idea. Then it's not really helpful for you. It should be truly what you feel and experience and interpret when you see that sentence stem, and then just write it, and write as though you're telling somebody that has never met you, that doesn't know anything about you, and you really want to make yourself clear because you don't want to be misunderstood. And what that does is that it allows me as a scorer to see what your thought process is, the way that you're connecting things, the way that you're thinking, what is really important to you, what is in the foreground and what is in the background. And then that's the information that I need to actually give the score. Sometimes people are not happy with their score, and then we redo it, and they write a lot more, and they still come up with the same score. So it's not really so much about how much you write, but the perspective that you're taking when you're writing. And that's what we're looking for, the perspective that you're taking when you're writing.
Yeah, the fear, I remember when I spoke to Terry, it's like, well, be careful if you're going to sleep on it or whatever, because you start second guessing yourself, you start changing, because, so it's really what comes up in that moment, and express it, and then move to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Otherwise, you start to second guess, you start to, like you said, right, kind of play the game, as we can say, right? Maybe the test person puts their hat on and says, oh, I want to crush this. But like you said, right, perspectives are not easy to camouflage, right, in most cases.
Yeah, it's not easy. Exactly. It's not easy to camouflage, and it's not easy to portray a different perspective that you're not actually experiencing.
So that's the good part about it, right? Which is fun. So for those of us who maybe tried, don't.
And plus, And plus it's not helpful. I mean,
I know, exactly.
you would really want to get an assessment that is targeted to you personally, individually. So if you try to represent a perspective that you do not have, it's not going to be helpful.
Exactly. It's your internal map, right?
Your
This
internal
is
map,
for
because
you. It's not for
yeah,
anybody else.
and we look at different themes, right? We look at our interiors and our action orientation, the intersubjectivity, and the systems, and how are they represented in your experience. And then we also look at shadow, and shadow is everything that we're not able to see. And that can be some area of our life where we are lagging behind in terms of the perspective that we're taking. It can be something that we have not been able to process from childhood, and we still look at it as though we were at the 1.5 stage or a toddler age. And also everything that is beyond that, which you have access to. Yeah. And so having that information that is specific to you is super helpful, because there are things that you're not able to see. And we can actually see from your writing, some of it, based on what you write. And to be able to look at that and see, sometimes the assessment is like very comprehensive, to put it mildly, and maybe a lot to take in. But it's actually a snapshot of what your perspective is today in all these areas. And it can give you the perspective, or what perspective you have. And that's extremely helpful.
No, but that's an internal guiding system that's being shown, right? That in that way, which is helpful to you, right? And like you said, right, with the do no harm, policy or value system of Terry, it's what is done with it is then up to the human, right? Whether they want to share, not share, what they feel about it, things like that. So that's beautiful. So through this, you were able to relate and communicate and be effective with the coaching clients as you use this approach versus the initial way you were coaching. Is that correct? I want to go back to that original.
Yes, thank you for going back. I get really happy about this. Yes, because what we see is that depending on the stage of development that the person is at, the client is at, they have different capacities. So then we can use skills or tools, psychological tools or coaching tools that are targeted to what is needed in the moment. The super beautiful thing about the stages model is that it has those parameters, right? The receptive, active, reciprocal, and interpenetrative. So we can go back and see, so where, if there is shadow, for example, where is the shadow, and pinpoint it to the 1.5 or 2.0. So if it's like 3 or 4 stages below your center of gravity, the way that you usually look at the world, then we call that shadow. It's something that has not grown up as much as the rest of you. So we can go back and say, wow, that's a 2.0. So it's a reciprocal parameter that is not working so well, and reciprocal in the concrete. And then you can just start training that reciprocal parameter. And it becomes very simple, laser-like, super efficient, and very effective way of coaching and working. And then we can look at the different styles of coaching and psychotherapy, and you can map them to the different stages. So if you use a psychological tool or coaching tool that is higher than what the person is able to do, it's not going to be helpful. Or if it doesn't go all the way to where they're at, it's not going to be helpful either.
So let's step back now. So me as an individual, now I have this internal map, right, of where I am in terms of human development, my perspective. Then I do this test. I get to have awareness of the shadows and all the different where I am, like that whole tree. Whether I know that I'm clearly not rounded. I'm like the tree on the left.
We all are, yeah. And that's the beauty of it too. Yeah.
Right. So now I have that, and I have somebody like yourself or Fionn to help me as I coach through this. But now let's step back and say, okay, now my day-to-day life. right? I'm married, I have kids, I have siblings, I have parents, I have colleagues, right? Now, how does that, and let's say they haven't done stages mapping or they haven't done mapping, right? So then how does that help me? It helps me with my blind spots. It helps me try to understand where I'm getting triggered because of those shadows, right? It helps me to communicate and in ways that maybe are more effective because, but I don't know where the other person is, but then I guess I'm educated to maybe guess where they are. I mean, how does that play out? Just,
Yeah,
while we
and
come
one way
towards
you're
the end.
educated, sorry, in one way you're educated because you get the description of the different stages when you take the assessment. So you're able to see, and this is the best way of learning actually. You go, yeah, this is what I see in this person when they do this and that. And remember, is for a particular situation and a particular context. So let's not classify people that this is 3.5, this is 4.0. And we have all the perspectives prior to the latest perspective that we experience, right? So I can also see it in myself. So, okay, so when I go shopping, I do the 3.5. I'm at 3.5, which is going like very efficient, going to, I need to do this and then organize everything and whatever. But so it's for this particular person in this particular circumstance and situation, this is what I see. And you can start seeing it. So awareness is the very first part, first step in learning, right? And in change. So you can start seeing how different people experience the world differently, including myself, of course.
Right?
And
how I am with Almu versus how I am with my mom or my dad or my kids or in a business meeting or a different business meeting, right?
Yes, exactly. And then we can see that some people can see them, that there are things about others that we can see that others cannot see. And then we start seeing, and then we realize, wow, that is the same about me. There are things about me that others can't see that I cannot see. That was the move from first person perspective to second person perspective, right? So this is the move from third person to fourth person in the subtle. So they see things in me that I cannot see.
Yes.
So that's when it helps you with your shadow. But then you can also see, well, but I see you that you're doing that. and you cannot see it. So this is a tool that again, do no harm, because you start seeing things and one can get so excited about this that you start projecting all over, right? Telling people what they're doing. So you're doing this and you're doing that. They may not want to hear.
Yeah.
They may not want to know.
Yeah, that's the piece I was saying, right? The ego can get triggered, and then you have comparison, judgment, so it's.
But even without talking about the stages, I may see at 3.5, we start seeing things in others that they cannot see. And I can see, so when you do that, you really are thinking this and that, or this is the pattern that I see when you are with this other person, for example. And you can see it and they cannot see it because it's their shadow. But to you, it's very clear, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge is to actually not go about telling everyone what you're seeing and everybody if they don't want to hear. And
if they haven't asked.
Exactly. And it's the same in coaching. We can only present things that the client is ready for.
Yeah.
If you go beyond, then it does more harm. And that's what we don't want to do in our daily life or in coaching. But then there's also other things, because there's new competencies. So in the stages, so when you become active at the 3.5, then there are competencies that are foundational, like skills that are foundational that have to do with the active driver, that will be part of all of the specific skills that can be developed in that stage. So the active driver has different subdrivers, for example. So you cannot be active if you don't have autonomy and you don't have initiation and follow through and completion and celebration. So all of those aspects are important. And if one of them is truncated, for whatever the reason, it could be for the past or because you don't have the skill, then the active driver is not going to be healthy. So we can look at those skills, and those will be part of your professional skills or your daily life skills. So if your initiative subdriver is not working, then you're going to have a really hard time initiating new projects or initiating new timelines or initiating new adventures, initiating even new relationships. So you can see how those are horizontal competencies that are needed for everything.
Okay, so in every area there are, you get to be educated in those pieces that can help you as you move and full out in that stage, and maybe are starting to look at maybe moving towards the next stage and maybe not, and that's perfect, right? With surrendering to life. And that's the thing, I think, the acceptance of where you are and the perfection of life and the trajectory of life, I think that's very important as you do this process, it feels.
Yep. Yeah. Our own individual and cultural trajectory, it's really important because it shapes who and what we are, how we see ourselves.
So we're coming towards the end of our time together. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to speak about in terms of human development? And if not, maybe some closing remarks to encourage or maybe just reinforce why anyone should, do this process?
Yeah, I think we have talked about a lot of things. There's so much more that we can say, and and at the same time, so it's kind of a complex world, but so keeping it short is sometimes difficult. But I think the closing remarks would be, accepting that there is development, that we are constantly changing, is one important step towards becoming greater, becoming more of who we are. Is like we're opening a window that will open many different worlds, and that's a beautiful thing. I see it more as an exploration. I see life as an exploration that we get to enjoy. So it's just more worlds to explore.
Okay, beautiful. So maybe the comment I made that I said to Kim, maybe I need to take back and just trust and surrender in the perfection of life and be open to whatever occurs as we open up to different spaces. You're laughing. Okay. I'll take that as a be careful what you wish for.
No, not at all. It's more like being open and trusting is one of the best recommendations that one can give about life, I feel.
Yeah.
So yes, don't be afraid. No.
I guess I was at that moment when I heard about all the experiences of other people in different spaces. So
yeah, but they're individual paths, right? Even though we're moving along a path that has been paved for us by those who came before us. It all depends on our background, our experience, how ready we are, and we're becoming more and more ready. And definitely these processes with genetic care will get us ready to keep going wherever life takes us. And it may be being really, really good at what we do in a horizontal way, or it may be keep exploring it more. I mean, we can fill up the stages in so many different ways, and that's the beauty of life.
All right. Thank you, Almo. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome. A pleasure.
And continuing to support all the lovely individuals and families that we care for. Thank you for your love and care always, your presence, your engagement as you really support them as they journey life and they go through the expansion, or like you said, horizontal, or whatever that feels best for them. And thank you everyone for taking the time to be here, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Pleasure.